Welcome to the Retaining WIT podcast. I'm Josie Haynes.
And I'm Jordana Kwok.
This show tackles the challenges of keeping women in tech.
Each episode, we discuss current events, experiences in the industry, and what it takes to create a workplace where women will thrive.
On today's episode of the Retaining WIT podcast, we're joined by Teresa Martyny, Software Development Manager at Amazon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so great to have you. The main topic of our conversation today is managing performance and making an impact during uncertain times. Before we dive in, though, let me take a moment to introduce Teresa. Teresa Martyny started her career in tech in 1997 at the Northeast Regional Data Center at the University of Florida. She spent time leading teams building powerful data products, most recently at companies like New Relic and Twitter, and is now a software development manager at Amazon. Her mission is to enable teams to build incredible products through thriving, collaborating efficiently, and being audacious. I love that one. Teresa, thank you for joining us today. We are looking forward to learning more about you and your career journey before diving into our main topic.
Thanks again for having me. It's really great to be able to chat with both of you. And good to reconnect with Jordana, who used to be my mentor.
Yeah, hi Teresa. Really happy to see you again and also joining us on this podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about your career journey and what inspired you to get into the tech industry?
Yeah, so it's funny. I got into the tech industry when I was 18. I was a junior at the University of Florida, and this guy David Burdett at NerdC, the Northeast Regional Data Center, hired me on as what was called a desktop publisher back then, and he wanted me to put the information up on the World Wide Web because it's a long time ago. We called it that back then. And yeah, I liked it. I enjoyed the work, and I started kind of listening in on other people's conversations on other teams and being like, "Oh, that's really cool what you guys are doing. Can you tell me more?" And then learning, and that's just kind of been the whole trajectory. Ear hustling and then moving my way up.
Awesome. I love that you started with learning HTML. I totally remember those days. And
Cold
yeah.
fusion.
What would you say is your proudest moments during your career journey?
Well, I've had a few team members throughout my career who have shared with me that I not only helped them transform their careers, but I also helped kind of transform their lives. And I was really grateful to be able to join them on that journey. And it meant a lot to me. One person shared that I gave them more mentorship, like impactful mentorship in a 2-hour session than they'd gotten in 3 years of the company, which that felt sad. So just wanting to support more folks. They did really hard transformative work, and sometimes it can be hard for us to get out of our own ways. So being able to support them in their journey to get out of their own way was awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I transitioned back into management. It's that feeling where you're able to give back and transform someone else's journey that has been really meaningful. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So getting back to our main topic around managing performance during times of uncertainty, what are some key strategies that you've found to be effective? And right now we are encountering a lot of economic uncertainty. And 2 to 3 years ago, it was around COVID and the pandemic. So this topic is quite relevant.
It is. And I'm going to talk about it from a few different ways. I think oftentimes when people come to me with this type of a question, they have a team, things are uncertain, folks aren't meeting expectations, and they want some magic wand they can wave to get them to start meeting expectations. And I'm gonna flip it around and start with, before you can manage someone else's performance, you have to manage your own. And so you want to make sure that your own performance is meeting their needs and that you're being clear in your communication and your expectations, and you're well grounded in what it is that your team needs. Another aspect of it is when your performance management is not just about managing your team members who are not meeting expectations. It's about managing the performance of all of your team members, including those who are exceeding expectations. Often we just kind of, you're doing great on your own, we're like focus on the folks who are struggling. Then we end up losing our top talent and they get neglected, they don't have the mentorship that's required, etc. So I wanted to just kind of start off with framing it there and then dig in a little bit on, I have numerous strategies that I use, and I use them in various combinations. So I'm going to run through them and then dig in on a few. So always starting with empathy and being a good human, right? You have to be bold and audacious to deliver immense value, but you also need to do that while empowering your team and being a good human. You have to be really curious at all times. Always be asking. If you have any assumptions, write them down for yourself so that you're aware that you're making those assumptions and keep them to yourself. Take all of those assumptions and flip them into really good questions and then ask that instead. And if you mess up and you make an assumption anyway, own that and acknowledge it. I made an assumption, let me try that again. We all fail and it's okay to flip it around. So then you want to be asking those questions. You want to be getting and giving feedback. You want to establish a purpose, encourage working together and increasing cross-team efforts, being clear, having transparency, being invested in your teams, making sure that you're taking advantage of opportunities that are possible, in particular in chaos. That last piece I'm going to dig into towards the end, and it's something you have to be really careful with, especially in times when thousands of people are losing their jobs. It can be an opportunity, but it can also land in a really cold way. So those are kind of the overarching strategies. So I'm going to dig into a couple of them. With giving and getting feedback, sometimes we don't share feedback until it's at the quarter mark or the year mark, or something's gone wrong, or there's been a pattern of things going wrong. And this is a disservice to everyone on the team. You want to be giving feedback early and often and in writing, and not through emails where then people are getting worried or it gets lost. Like, communicate with them in the regular channels that you have. And notice, okay, that team member just shared a piece of information with the team and helped everyone on the team grow. Reach out to them. Takes 2 seconds to say, hey, I noticed that you did that, and the impact of that was that the team now has more knowledge on that subject matter and we can all better support that issue. Thank you for taking that action to take what you learned and share it with other people. Those little bits of feedback help guide our team to be more effective at a much faster pace. And if someone does something that you would like to see less of, give them again that more immediate feedback. I tend to try to do that more face to face, either live in person or in a video chat. And I start with, again, asking questions. How do you think that went? I noticed this happened when you did this. Did you notice that? Sometimes they don't always have the self-awareness, or sometimes they've already self-corrected. They already acknowledged to themselves what happened and they're already in the process of correcting. Maybe when you reach out to them, they're already reaching out to a person that they wanted to repair that harm with. So always give them the benefit of the doubt, ask great questions, be curious. That is going to help them to to share the ways that they want to improve, or share ways that they think they really killed it, and then you can validate. They're going to have perspectives that maybe you miss. Purpose is something that can get really funny in times of turmoil. Maybe the company's direction is changing. Maybe entire teams are gone. Maybe the company is flailing a bit, is losing a little bit of their clarity. And so helping the team retain a clear sense of focus on their purpose is really important. And if the company doesn't have one, make one for yourselves. And even in the lack of the company having a clear focus, you can establish it for them. Why did they come to the company in the first place? What is their mission in their career? And then you can help them recenter and focus on that purpose. You can get creative in turmoil to find a North Star. Working together is one of those tools that is really important, and you have to weigh against your team and how they collaborate. But when there are times of high anxiety, like now, anxiety and fear are really pervasive at companies. When you're changing leadership, you're going through an acquisition, you're having layoffs, and bringing people together can help form that sense of community that provides that sense of stability and joy. And it can help from especially if folks end up spinning and digging into water cooler channels or whatnot, and are getting caught up in any kind of gossip, and they're kind of spinning in that way and having a hard time focusing on the task at hand. When they're doing it together, can be easier. For transparency, I've heard so many stories from folks where their manager told them, "Oh, don't worry, you're not going to get let go," or, try to make promises that they really can't make, or just don't address their concerns at all and simply leave it to, "I have no information." And I have found that what's really helpful in those moments, I've been through a lot of companies that have gone through many layoffs and restructures. And what I've found is really, really helpful in those moments is just to be really transparent from a historical perspective. And that helps them build the resiliency. We don't know what's going to happen. And so, given that, there are these possibilities. What would you do if each of these possibilities played out? Let's help brainstorm it. Sometimes if you're feeling like there's unknowns, it can feel scarier. But if you've got a plan for every contingency, then you know what your next steps are going to be no matter what. And that can really help feel more settled in your role and in the work that you're doing. Within these situations, there's helping people focus as the task at hand and doing the work that they're there to do. And there's also you focusing on continuing to grow them and set them up for success wherever they land. Whether they continue to grow at the company because they're retained, or they're growing on in their career by moving on to another company, you want to set them up for success no matter what. That's my take. That's my belief. So for me, I help folks, and this kind of starts to get into, actually, I'm going to flip it because that gets into another question that I know you wanted to chat about. So I'm going to jump to the opportunity and chaos piece. There is opportunity in chaos, and leaders will often use this, especially when they're answering for, why we're letting people go. And they talk about, it's best for the business. When people leave, there is a vacuum of tasks that need to be accomplished, right? And so yes, all of my biggest opportunities for growth, where I have just skyrocketed in my career, have been situations where my entire leadership chain left and I had to step in and be that leader. I had to step in and form the strategy for the entire department. And I had to manage 3 teams of people without the title. You take on the responsibility of 2 layers above you without the compensation. But it is opportunity. It's a hard way to come by that opportunity because it comes with a lot of stress. It comes with a lot of expectations. And, if your entire leadership is gone, it comes without guidance. So you're figuring it out on your own. When I talk about this, I'm not talking about it from a place of use this to spin things for your team, but as a way for when you're in that situation and you're feeling that anxiety and you may not have other options, to try to find those opportunities and use them for yourself. I tell this to my ICs. When we're going through a lot of turmoil, I tell my ICs, this is a chance for you to really grow hard and fast if you want it. So if you want it, let me know and I will get you there. I'll get you those opportunities because I'm more invested in their careers than I am in them staying on my team and delivering my roadmap. I know that no matter what they do at the company, it's a win for the company and for them.
Thank you so much for sharing all those details. I love that you really deep dove into those strategies, and hopefully, our listeners will take some new insights away for things they haven't tried before. And so, let's dive into our next question here. How do you maintain morale and motivation amongst your team members during these periods of uncertainty, especially when there's a lot of anxiety and stress and emotions involved?
Yeah, so that for me, that piece is all about the resilience. And you want to increase the resilience. There are three different strategies that I use to do that. One is making sure that they have, this is something that I make sure of at all times, but in particular in times of turmoil, is making sure that they are taking time for their professional development. If they are not setting aside time every week working on developing their professional skills and strengths, you can make time yourself for the whole team on the calendar and have a set time. People tend to learn better and at different times of day, so I usually let them set it aside, but I encourage them to set aside 1 hour a week to pick something that they want to dive deeper on and to do it. And then once they've learned something, I then ask them, who do you want to teach this? Do you want to teach it to the team, to the department, to the whole company? Do you want to do it through a one pager, a Slack post, a tech talk? A strong culture of constant learning and teaching others is going to help them be resilient in their skills, which is going to help them whether they stay at a company or go, and everyone wins. This is probably the hardest part. The hardest part is working with them on their network. If you have a strong network of folks, you're going to have a place that you can land. And regardless of what happens in the economy, you want to have a strong network, internal and external to the company. This also benefits the company and the engineers because they're going to learn things from people in their network, like I did with Jordana, right? Jordana was at Netflix and I was at Twitter, but I learned from her about how Netflix did things and I was able to take those learnings back into the company. Those are going to be ways that they can have a place, they have the community that they can turn to and they can learn. It brings more creative ideas into the company and helps build their resilience. And then the third piece is kind of ties into the impact piece. Are they delivering value? Being able to ensure that they are delivering quantifiable, unique, and demonstrable value is really critical. The strategy that I take there is I make sure that my team's goals and objectives roll up to the department and the company's goals and objectives, as well as our customers' goals and objectives. I've run platform teams for a while now, so usually my customers are internal and they have OKRs of their own. And then not only do I do that, I have the engineers drive the metric gathering and tracking for our OKRs. It keeps them really close to the customer. It keeps them really close to feeling their pain as well as their successes. And it really helps motivate and inspire them to do incredible work and focus on solving the pain point rather than delivering a solution. And because if you just deliver a solution, it may not solve the right problem. And in times of uncertainty with companies, you really want to make sure that at all times, everyone on that team can speak to the really specific value that you bring, both for the current leadership of the company, but also, and for themselves, but also for, if they move on to their next role, they can really clearly state what experience they're bringing with them and what value they brought to the prior company.
These are some really amazing tips on building resilience, and they're really concrete. And I feel like it provides people with a lot more focus, especially when there's just so much that they can't control around them. So I hope folks who are listening to this will have some new tips to take away and apply in their roles. And something that we touched upon a little bit earlier are some of the common challenges that leaders and managers face during uncertain times. So I'm curious, like what are some of those other things that you also see that leaders and managers might encounter?
Yeah. So there's the challenges from above, right, from your leadership chain, but then there's also the challenges with your direct reports. Some challenges from above are things like leadership vacuums. Either the leadership physically leaves or they're mentally checked out, and or they have so many fires that they're putting out that they don't have the ability to provide the leadership they once did to the team. So in those moments you really have to fill in the void and step up and provide the leadership that was once there. Another thing that you can run into is leadership whiplash. I've seen this in situations where maybe companies were kind of the top of the industry at one time and they lost that footing, and then they're scrambling to figure out how to get back into that position by throwing around a lot of uninformed Hail Marys and leaning on hunches. And those can result in some chaos. And in those scenarios, you really have to protect the team. And while responding to the leadership demands that are all over the place, maintaining clear line of sight for what your team needs to do. For fear, the other thing that comes from the top but then rolls down into your team is lack of information when there's just radio silence. And whenever there's a lack of information, people start to try to fill it in. And some of that information that gets filled in is misinformation. So then you're having to manage how that's rolling out. So take the strategy that you're using for yourself about your own assumptions that we already talked about earlier and help the team with that too. If you notice that someone's making an assumption, try to acknowledge that it's an assumption and encourage everyone to flip those assumptions into questions and stay curious. And just because making those assumptions and working with incorrect information will just make things worse. And I just had a great conversation about that with my friend today. When you're faced with the unknown or ambiguity, you can't control that situation, but you can control how you respond to the stimulus. And your experience of that ambiguity and that stressful and anxious filled situation you do have control over how you experience it. It can feel like you don't sometimes, but you do. And so write down what you don't know and helping your team to do that as well. And using those strategies that we talked about earlier around building resilience can help address those. For misinformation, this happens every day. Like all of our work, there can be times when people misrepresent a fire that's happening in our software, etc. And for all of those situations, just ask questions. If someone says something is true, ask for information about how they know that. And then you can start to get down to the truth. So for example, if someone says layoffs have begun, then you can say, how do you know? And maybe they know because their friend's team was let go that morning, but maybe they think they know because someone mentioned it in a Slack channel and it's just gossip. So then once you get down to the truth, normally people are pretty logical and can accept that, okay, maybe we don't know the truth of this yet, but don't shame them, because if you're starting with that empathy, then you know what the roots are of where this misinformation comes from, and you can be compassionate with them about it. The last thing, this is also something that happens all the time, regardless of the chaos around you, but it can get a lot worse with uncertain times, is catastrophizing. And some common phrases that we'll all be familiar with in our line of work are things like saying, this is a shit show, this is a trash fire, what a war zone, using terms like always and never, or it's going down in flames, the cube blew up and I killed it, right? All very dramatic, catastrophizing language. And it can feel really cathartic in the moment, but it ultimately ends up fueling anxiety. And so when I notice a lot of that language happening, what I'll usually do is start with checking in with them. It sounds like you've been a little stressed out lately. Can you tell me what's going on for you? How are you feeling about things? And kind of get to the underlying roots of why we might use that kind of language. And then when it's coming up, like let's say it comes up in stand up or in Slack that the system's on fire, then you can say, what happened? The alerts are going off. Which alerts? Oh, just these two. How often? Oh, just for 5 minutes during a deploy. So the system is otherwise stable? Yes. Okay. There we go. So then we've taken this catastrophe and boiled it down to it's a small problem that felt really big in that moment and it carried with us, right? It stuck with us, but we can see it for what it is and use really specific language to talk about what's going on.
Thank you so much for sharing those, especially that catastrophizing one really resonates with me. I so often hear folks when they are overwhelmed making things much bigger. And not that big things don't happen, they do, but we need to make sure that we treat things with their right scope. So thank you for bringing that one up. And so, how do you balance short term needs and long term goals when making decisions during these times of uncertainty?
So it kind of depends on the degree of uncertainty. We, sometimes we hit uncertain times when maybe the company didn't hit numbers for the quarter for the first time. But then there's another circumstance where maybe like a recent situation with me where the company was definitely coming under new ownership, and the new ownership had been clear about what their intentions were. So we had some heads up of what was coming. And so depending on the scenario and the severity and what's known and what's unknown, you're going to balance those short-term needs and long-term needs in different ways. For a situation where it's newly uncertain and like maybe you didn't hit the numbers for the first time, then for that scenario, you want to build up you want to strengthen your infrastructure and your processes. So make sure that you have observability into your numbers. You want to make sure that you're being data driven with really high quality and reliable data at the company level. I may be biased, it might be my line of work, but it's true. And because it should be easy to make accurate data driven decisions, both big and small. And you want to be reflecting deeply on what the department can be doing, both short and long term, to have an impact on turning that around, driven by the ROI of those efforts. And this is something I've advocated for a long time. I'm a big fan of monitoring. It's how I landed at New Relic. Sometimes we'll add monitoring when things are done. And I want to advocate for people to consider adding monitoring before you've started. Apply TDD, test-driven development, to monitoring. Watch it progress from being a blank screen or a blank cell with no data or the current state of the benchmark, and watch it move towards the goal throughout the duration of your project. So that way you can adapt if it's not progressing, and reflecting on mechanisms that you need to be right more often. But if the company is definitely coming under new ownership and you know that it's going in a different direction, or you have no idea what the company is going to be doing and there are massive reorgs happening across the company, investing in long-term goals is not where you need your your efforts. You want to try to see around the corner to where it's headed and think big and pull together proposals for possible paths ahead for longer term efforts. So doing some brainstorming so that, you don't want a new person walking in and being like, we have no idea. What are your ideas? Tell us what to do. You want to come to that person or that new leadership and with ideas already formed. Maybe they'll get thrown out, but at least you're not starting from scratch. And then in the meantime, deliver on the most high impact and quick wins that can make a difference right now on strengthening the company.
Thank you for sharing some of those tips on balancing the short-term needs and the long-term goals, especially when there's a bit of chaos and turmoil that might be happening. It sounded like you went through this recently. I remember I went through this also at Netflix when we missed our numbers, and it was really hard to be able to distinguish between what you can control. So perhaps it's brainstorming what those ideas are, and what you can't control, meaning how perhaps consumers are behaving. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing very concrete ideas on how to work through it, because you certainly went through that yourself.
Yeah, it's been a few rounds now.
Yeah, and at the end of each episode, we like to ask our guests to share a retaining wit tip of the week. So Teresa, what is one tip you'd like to share with women in the tech industry?
So one of I mentioned earlier kind of getting out of your own way. And one of the tools that I will use to do that is reflecting on what if this thing was possible. Sometimes I'll have folks, and myself included, where there will be these moments of thinking this thing is not possible. It's not possible to deliver this with so many fewer people. It's not possible to get alignment with these other teams who don't want to be aligned, right? There's so many different things in our careers. In those moments when faced with impossibility, I always pose the question, well, what if it let's just put reality aside. Let's put the perceived reality aside. What if it was possible? If it was, what would be your next smallest step? And sometimes just taking those really small next steps can help us start to see past the impossibility and towards a solution.
I love that tip because it really resonates with the rest of the theme for this too, right? So often if you're going through uncertain times, you can feel overwhelmed, and just figuring out what that next little thing is and counting it as a win, right? So often we
Yes.
try to create to-do lists with 20 things on them, and then we were like, we failed if we didn't accomplish all of them. And one of the tips I always tell people is pick the one thing you're going to do every day. That might be making your bed, and celebrate it as a win if you do that. It can really help when you're in the wrong mindset. So thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing that tip and all of your amazing insights today.
Thank you for having me on the show. It was really great chatting with you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast comes to you in collaboration with the SheTO community. Did you know that less than 9% of engineering exec roles are held by women? SheTO is on a mission to change that. SheTO is a private network for women and non-binary engineering leaders with the goal of accelerating careers of our members and building their high-powered network. Learn more at sheto.org.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Retaining WIT podcast. You can keep up with our episodes at retainingwit.com, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast shows. Please be sure to subscribe and leave a review so we can grow our audience. Thank you.